I never wanted to be the face of the company. I was fine staying invisible, as long as the work spoke for itself. I'm saying this now because people think revenge always looks loud or emotional. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's already built into the system long before anyone realizes they've made a mistake. My name is Claire. I'm a software architect. For 6 years, I worked at a health tech startup called NovaCare, a company founded by my uncle and 2 of his friends. They like to call it a family-run innovation hub. What that really meant was that decisions were made at dinner tables, credit was given selectively, and I was always introduced as the technical support brain. I just worked. NovaCare's flagship product was called PulseNet, a remote patient monitoring system used by hospitals across 3 states. Heart data, neural signals, medication sync, everything ran through one central architecture. Publicly, the system was credited to the executive team. Privately, every critical line of code came through me. I designed the core logic. I wrote the fail-safes. I maintained the compliance layers. I even handled FDA audit responses under my uncle's name. But whenever journalists visited, I was asked to stay behind the scenes. Then OmniHealth came. They wanted to acquire NovaCare for just under $1 billion. Suddenly everyone started smiling more, wearing better suits, talking about legacy. And that's when I was told I was being let go. The reason they gave was almost funny. We're restructuring, my uncle said calmly. OmniHealth already has engineers. They don't need internal maintenance staff. Maintenance. That word stayed with me. I asked about equity, about my contract, about my role in the system's creation. My uncle leaned back and said, "Architects don't own buildings. They just draw them." I signed nothing. I argued nothing. I just stood up, handed over my badge, and left. What they didn't know was that PulseNet wasn't just software. It was a regulated medical control system, and buried deep inside it was something I'd added 2 years earlier, quietly, legally, and fully documented. I called it the Sentinel layer. PulseNet required a weekly validation handshake from a licensed system architect, not a password, not a login, a biometric-based authorization tied to a single federal registration ID. Mine. If that handshake failed, the system wouldn't crash. It wouldn't malfunction. It would do something much worse. It would freeze, data would lock, devices would halt safely, logs would auto-upload to a federal compliance server. And the system would display a single message across every dashboard: licensed supervisor not detected, system operating without authorization. I added it after watching another company get sued into oblivion for unsafe deployment. The board approved it. They just never bothered to understand it. 3 weeks after I was fired, OmniHealth hosted the acquisition announcement. Big stage, big screens, live demo. I was watching from my apartment. That morning my phone buzzed. A reminder notification from my own system. Weekly Sentinel validation pending. I didn't touch it. At exactly 11:42 a.m., PulseNet went into compliance lockdown. Heart monitors across the demo froze mid-graph. Screens went dark. Then, the message appeared. Red text. Impossible to miss. People panicked. Executives whispered. Engineers scrambled. My phone rang, then rang again. My uncle, then his partners, then a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, the logs triggered their second function. Every modification made to PulseNet over the last 18 months, including unauthorized clinical data adjustments, was uploaded automatically. By the time I arrived at headquarters that evening, the FBI was already there. My uncle looked older, smaller. They asked me if I had sabotaged the system. I said no. I explained calmly that PulseNet was functioning exactly as designed, that operating it without a licensed supervisor was a felony, that my termination had removed the only authorized validator. I showed them the documentation, the audit trail. Silence filled the room. OmniHealth suspended the acquisition that night. My uncle didn't look at me. As I walked out, one of the agents asked if I planned to reactivate the system. I told him yes, once it was under ethical management. 6 months later, NovaCare no longer existed. OmniHealth rehired me directly. New title, new contract, full authority. I didn't celebrate, because this story isn't about winning. It's about what happens when people mistake silence for weakness. and forget that the quiet ones usually build the foundations everything else stands on. Sometimes revenge isn't emotional. Sometimes it's already written in the code.